Have you ever woken up after a really great night's sleep and had a big kink in your neck? Have you ever just moved really fast and then your back went out on you? Well, I have, and let me tell you, I've spent a lot of time with chiropractors. But did it ever cross your mind that possibly, just possibly, your best friend may have had the same things happen to them too? In today's episode, Dr. Joren Whitley joins me. He's a chiropractor, but he's not your basic chiropractor. He's a human chiropractor. He does all kinds of animals and even some really crazy exotic ones. Now, I want you to think about this. If your dog is overweight, and let's face it, a lot of dogs these days are overweight and can definitely lose a few pounds. But I want you to imagine your dog, probably like mine, jumps up and down off the couch all the time. Does the possibility of them tweaking something make sense now? Well, we're going to get into all that and wait till you hear the science behind animal chiropractic. And wait to hear what needing to be adjusted actually fix. It's not just their necks and their back. Then wait till you hear the heartwarming stories of treating some crazy exotic pets. And one story in particular went viral all over social media. And without a doubt, when you hear the story and then when you look it up, you're going to be one of those people who's going, oh my God, this is so cool. Now, I love this episode, so get ready to be, you know me, adjusted by Dr. Joren Whitley. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Joren Whitley of Oklahoma Chiropractic, and we're going to get into all kinds of really cool stuff. And for you guys that don't know much about chiropractic animals, we're going to really get into it. Hey, Jordan, thanks so much for getting on this thing. I know you're busy, and we've had some conversations, and I know it's going to be a good one. So I'm excited to have you here.
Yes, sir. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, what I was thinking is that when we start, let's get into your background because your education isn't quite what I would have thought getting where you are, but I know all the education you had to do. So let's just talk about how you got, let's talk about you and get into where we are today.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So actually went to Oklahoma State University. My degree is in biochemistry and molecular biology. So I worked with test tubes. I worked in a lab. I ended up leaving working in a lab, and I actually worked concrete, crazy enough, for about 5 years. And during the time I was working concrete, I got hurt, and that kind of led me into chiropractic. Well, in chiropractic school, it's actually 3.5 years of nonstop school. So in chiropractic school, we went like 32 hours per trimester. In college, the most I could take was like 18.
Right.
So, I mean, I got more hours in like a year and a half than I did in 4 years of college. And yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of schooling. And then to work on animals, I took an extra 6 months to take all of the information that I already knew about humans and translate that over into the animal world, knowing, pressure, how to adjust, the proper angles to adjust, force and depth and what I'm feeling for in all of that. And it was, that by itself was a ton of class time, and then also a lot of time out of class practicing and trying to hone that skill.
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting about you when I was reading this stuff on your website and all that, You not only do animals, but you do humans. So you're doing humans and animals, and there's got we're going to get into some of those things, some of the people, some of the animals you've treated, but it's a pretty wild journey.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we work on, I don't know, between 60 and 80 people a day plus animals. It just kind of depends on the day. I mean, and we work on all sorts of crazy stuff here at the office too. But yeah, so I'll be covered in hair 1 minute and lint roll, wash my hands, I'm working on people. And it's just crazy up in here all the time.
Well, I find your journey kind of weird and cool at the same time. You're basically a microbiologist. That's your training in undergrad, and then what was your injury when you got hurt and decided to study chiro?
Yeah, so I was actually so I was concrete construction, and I was trying to lift this really heavy piece of machinery by myself because I was, in my early 20s and an idiot. And
And from Oklahoma.
yeah, and from Oklahoma, yeah. So you just do it yourself, throw it over your shoulder, you're good. Well, I felt a pop in my back, and I was kind of ignorant. I had never taken anatomy courses. I had never gone through that, so I didn't really know what was going on. And it was one of those deals where I talked to my boss, who was also my grandpa, and I talked to a bunch of other people, and they were like, "Well, it's medication or potential surgery." And I was like, "Man, I really don't like medication." And I really, really don't want to look at surgery. And my stepdad was like, "Hey, you should try chiropractic." And I was like, "I don't know what that is. Honestly, I'm kind of skeptical." So I went in, and it was like, "Hey, I'm here for you to fix me up, I guess." After the first visit, I felt a little bit better, and then the second visit, like I felt better than I did the first time. But they also like started explaining the science behind what chiropractic is, and just it lit me up, and I caught on fire for it.
Well, having played a lot of sports over my life, I've spent a lot of time with good chiropractors doing that thing. And, and you can get into the detail, but, the way I always look at it, if you think of your spinal cord, it's really where all your electrical system is. And correct me where I'm wrong, at least this is my vision of it. So I've got this big electrical cord there. My back gets kinked. It's kinking my electrical system, which is one of the reasons why I'm not functioning correctly.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good way to look at it. It's so much more in depth than that. Like,
Well, I'm very not in depth.
yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I mean, like people see that we move bones, and they're like, "Well, you move bones, make my back feel better." And I'm like, it's so much deeper. Like the nerves that go from your back into your gut or your heart, or what's crazy is even deeper than that. The neurology and how it all plays together, and it changes how your brain perceives where your body is in space, and the like the thresholds for pain change, and the biochemical changes that happen in your brain or in your body, the changes in your stress levels or your hormones. It's insane what we do.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And we should get a little bit more into that because, again, for somebody who probably hasn't done it or maybe done it a little bit, and I'm going to stay on the human side and we'll get to the animals here in a second. But, what most people don't realize that electrical system, the way I'm going to explain it, it affects every function that we have.
Hmm.
And so if you can kind of dig in a little bit more for people that don't know it, I don't know if you listened to the intro on my, the trailer for the podcast, but one of the things I go into, and of course I haven't had a guest there. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted you on. I kind of joke about, can you imagine seeing a horse getting adjusted? And it's because I find it fascinating. I know, I talk to vets all the time and the benefits that I hear from it, it's pretty amazing. So just kind of dig in a little bit more into that so people understand it better.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I mean, let's take something simple like someone's lower back hurts, right? So if we look at just the like why does it hurt, right? They're perceiving pain. So if we look at just the pain receptors, like why are they perceiving pain, and then what does that pain over a long period of time do to the body? Well, pain over time eventually causes the body to perceive pain differently. So it's like when you have chronic pain, your body is like at a lower threshold for pain, so you feel pain easier, right? That's just like the pain aspect of it. But if we look at where the nerves come out of, let's say, the sacrum, pelvis, lower back, and they go into like the gut, and let's say it's causing your gut to not function like it's supposed to, something super easy, or even like mid back. We'll talk about mid back, the nerves that go into the stomach. So if the stomach isn't getting the proper messages, then the stomach maybe not produces the right amount of stomach acid it's supposed to have. Well, if it doesn't produce the right stomach acid amount, then it's not going to be the proper pH for proper absorption. it's also going to cause intrinsic factors to not bind to B12 properly. So now we can end up with like a B12 deficiency because we have low stomach acid. We also are going to now have more acid reflux because our stomach acid is low, so it doesn't eat all of the stuff that we digest. It more like ferments it, slow cooks it, it slowly digests it. And so now we have acid reflux issues. We're also not digesting all of our food as well as we should. So now we end up with issues like we can potentially create autoimmune condition issues if we have large particles of food that travel through the gut.
Right.
I mean, it just like very in-depth stuff there, but it can lead to massive, massive issues just by potentially having something in the mid-back irritated. And I mean, we worked on people before, and all of a sudden their acid reflux is gone. Or look at the lower gut, and we work on babies or adults or whatnot, and we make it a pelvic adjustment, and all of a sudden they're like, I have to go to the bathroom, and they go and they like babies blow out diapers all the time in here because their gut is like a giant conveyor belt, and if it's not getting the proper messages or the proper electricity, then it's not going to move as well as it should. And so, I mean, that's just two examples, very, very, very easy examples. I mean, we've had people who have had to get off of their Synthroid, their thyroid medication, because their thyroid starts producing thyroid again. We've had people get off heart medications, high blood pressure medication, antidepressants. I mean, it's just fascinating how the body is so interconnected that one little thing that we do affects so much more. And I mean, that kind of plays into that whole idea that we directly affect the nerve that's coming right out of the spine. But then there's the other part where the brain perceives where it is in space based on how the joints move. If the joints don't move properly, then the basically the map that the brain has of the body gets skewed. And so people come in and lay on our table all the time, and they're laying crooked sideways, and they perceive that they are standing up straight. Or if you can see it in the mirror, some people see that they're all crooked and lopsided, and they're like, "Oh, I'm standing up straight. What do you mean?" And their body now perceives their crooked nature, their crooked posture as up and down. Well, as soon as they close their eyes, we hear about people falling in the shower. They lifted their head, fell in the shower, or they
Right.
close their eyes and they have balance issues. Their body perceives that their brain perceives their body as straight up and down when it's actually not. And I mean, that creates all sorts of problems. Vertigo. I mean, we have just the craziest of stuff. I mean, any potential problem in the body, we could potentially talk about how the body is being affected by joints not moving properly.
And yeah, and let's transfer over to animals. But when I was sitting there where you're talking about it, I was kind of thinking about today's cars, right? So we have all these sensors on the car.
Oh yeah.
So basically, that pain we have now that we feel, or even the animal feels, is kind of that sensor because we're a computer system. That's why I like all these guys that are trying to work on cancer, and basically some of these guys that were old hackers are now saying, "Well, I'm going to hack the body, and I'm going to solve the problems by hacking the body," because that's what we are.
Right.
So that's kind of what you're the hacker, but with the sensors telling the hacker, "Okay, we'll fix this," and you're going to fix that, kind of, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's really cool because we have patients come in. Let's say it's take some of the patients I had today. They have massive headaches, but they also have balance issues, and we're you're talking about hacking. Like we're recalibrating their perception of where their body is. So then it's changing like everything else about their body. So like you talk about people wanting to lose weight, right? And they want to hack the body to lose weight. Well, we're like, well, actually, if we make an adjustment here, it changes cortisol levels. That will reduce these hormones, which causes your body to be less stressed, which means you're going to burn more fat. Like it's like the body hacking stuff.
Right.
But we're doing that by making bones move. I mean, it just really cool stuff.
Kind of like rebooting on a computer.
Yes.
That's what we're kind of doing is you're rebooting, getting everything back, defagging or fragging or whatever they call it in the computer too. I don't know why I'm in the computer thing because I'm not a computer guy. But here I am today doing that. It comes up all the time on the podcast is the more I do this, as you know, we've talked about, I have stem cells and we're doing some different wild science as well. But the more you realize that animals go through the same issues we have. So let's cross over because, the people are listening, aside from themselves having issues, have animals. So let's talk about how that works in animals. And then let's get into adjustment and wherever you want to go, I want to go there with you because the more I hear it, the more I get excited about hearing all this stuff.
Oh, for sure. So, man, we could go into a whole nother realm. So, like, people really don't think about their dog or their horse or their cat having like a headache, or having sciatica or having radiculopathy issues or carpal tunnel or any of those things, right? We think of those for people, but we don't think about our animals having those problems. And we have animals that come in and most of the time it's cats. They have a terrible, terrible demeanor,
Yeah.
and they are just absolutely just ticked off at the world. And we make an adjustment, and all of a sudden, this cat turns into this cuddly, instead of being a furry razor blade, they're wanting love and affection. It's just crazy because animals can deal with the same problems, but we don't normally realize they have those problems.
Because they can't communicate it.
Yeah, because they can't communicate it. So we see it after it's become a major problem. Oh my gosh, my dog is limping. Oh my gosh, my dog is dragging its legs and it can't walk anymore. We get into these massive problems whenever the signs are like way, way, way earlier on. Kind of like if your car, all of a sudden your car is smoking and you're like, oh man, what happened? And it's like, oh, wait, I forgot it was making a ticking noise. And I did notice it drove a little funky, but I ignored it.
Right.
We kind of don't realize, or most people don't like look for those little bitty signs like, oh my gosh, my dog used to jump on the bed all the time, but now it doesn't want to. It asks for me to help pick it up. Or my dog used to jump in and out of the truck. One of those whenever they sit down, it looks like they take longer to sit down. They don't want to go up the stairs. Those little bitty things are like, well, if I didn't want to go up the stairs or if I didn't want to jump off something, well, it might be because something hurts. We kind of ignore those things until it becomes a bigger problem.
Sure.
So my biggest goal is to show people that animals can deal with the same problems we do. And just as I can work on someone's neck and help a headache, or I can help their radiculopathy or their carpal tunnel or their sciatica, we can also help the animals that have the same problem and prevent it. And so instead of it being hey, I have a problem, can you fix this? It's hey, let's go ahead and start maintenance early so that we prevent it from ever happening. Like a dentist. You go to the dentist and you're like, I'm going to keep my teeth clean so I don't get cavities. The dentist is there to help you when you do have cavities or you have other problems, but you want to try to maintain so where you don't end up having cavities. You want to make sure you change your oil so you don't have the car that's smoking. And so we try to do the same thing. Instead of being neck and back doctors, we're trying to be, we are more wellness associated. So we have animals come in all the time that, like puppies. We have people bring puppies in, no different than we have people bring in babies.
Right.
And we are checking, like birth can be really traumatic. And if you start looking at the breeds, a great example is like a Frenchie. Not very often are there natural births for French bulldogs. Because of the breeding and all that, most of them have become C-section.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's not all of them, so don't quote me on that. It's not all of them, but like I would say a majority of the dogs that come in that are Frenchies, their stuff says that when they were born, it was by C-section.
Oh, wow.
We've had one or two breeders bring them in that say they try to do everything all natural, they try to go through that process as well as they can in the natural way it should happen. But a lot of them are C-section. So if you think about like just how traumatic birth is, think about, we're talking about dogs, right? But think about like a giraffe or a horse. Their baby they're not on the ground and they deliver their baby from, 4 feet up.
Right.
And so baby hits the ground, and part of that is that process to get them to start breathing. And there is a bunch of neurology that happens whenever they hit the ground. But we've had cattle, they hit the ground and mom steps back and steps on the baby. Or they hit the ground, and because of that, they've shifted their pelvis and now they can't walk or whatever. And we have dogs come in all the time that have upper neck conditions and they have a head tilt, or they can't walk a straight line. And so with that, we try to help at the very beginning when something first happens. We try to help either fix issues that are already there, or we go, you know what, let's go ahead and make sure you are going to be the very best you can be. Let's go ahead and check the spine to make sure there are no issues that need to be addressed now before we wait and let those issues turn into bigger issues. Because this very small problem now turns into a very, very big problem later.
It becomes a bigger structural problem.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, muscles and everything start adapting to compensate.
Exactly. And so we can have those compensations that happen over a long period of time, or some that happen over a short period of time. If you have a small splinter and you leave it alone, it can get infected, it can get, festering, it can get really, really nasty, or your body goes, you know what, let's go ahead and calcify this over. And it becomes a spot where your body's like, hey, we have a problem here. So we're just going to build up more tissue around it to protect you. Well, now it becomes a point of pain later because your body has put so much tissue around it that's causing discomfort. The body is the same, or whenever we're working on the spine, it's the same way. Like, we work on something now before it becomes a problem later because it's not moving properly. If a joint's not moving well, it doesn't absorb force as well. So it's like, if you always use the example, like if you jumped off your roof, and we're not talking like 2-story, but like a 1-story building, you jump off your roof, you can do it a couple times, but if you lock your legs, you're only doing it once because it's really going to hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Your body can't absorb the forces properly. Now, body does that on micro scales across all of your vertebrae for people and animals. And so your little bitty dog jumping off the bed that's 2 times their height over and over and over again, it's like jumping off of your roof. And because our roofs are 2 times taller than we are, right?
Right.
So they're jumping off these things all day long, and we don't think about it. And your, Chihuahua or your Dachshund in the wild, not saying there are a bunch of them running in the wild, but they're not jumping off of stuff that's
There's a bunch of rats out there. They're kind of
yeah, wild pack of Dachshunds. But they're not meant to jump off of stuff of that height. But we don't think anything about it. We just have our dog and we put them in our house, and they jump off of our furniture that we want to be this high because it's better for our comfort. Well, then the dog has issues, and same thing with horses and I mean, we don't have to worry about them jumping off of stuff, but we do have things that we get them to do that we're like, oh, for this activity we want them to do this. Well, maybe biomechanically that's setting them up for failure in the future if we don't constantly if we don't constantly work on it. So I mean, there's so many of those little bitty things that we don't even think about that later on become massive problems.
Well, I always talk about things. If it sounds simple, it means it's really hard. And the reality is that when these guys are, using a horse as an example, whatever they weigh, that much weight that they're carrying and running with, you've got to imagine that there's minor things that are happening all the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, people train with weight vests for a reason. You see somebody training with a 20-pound weight vest, and it's giving them an advantage later when they take that weight vest off. But you think about a horse carrying a 180-pound rider, a 140-pound rider, or a 200-something pound rider. Like, over time, that does cause problems. And you're talking
Sure.
English saddles, you're talking Western saddles, you're hopefully having proper saddle fit. And then imagine that you're totally fit, you're a CrossFitter that is super fit, CrossFit Games, you're wearing a rucksack, and you're going about and you're working out. Your body is primed and conditioned for that, and everything should be okay because your body should be primed for that. But let's say that you already have back pain, neck pain, your knee hurts, whatever, and then somebody throws that same weight pack on you and you go to work out and you're not as fit. You're going to have problems because your body is already in pain, and now you're increasing the weight bearing of those joints. You're going to cause more damage. And the same thing with our horses. You have a horse and it doesn't have a problem, and then all of a sudden it has a problem, and you're like, oh wow, we just developed this problem. Did we, or was it a really small problem that became a very large problem because you put this weight on it? So it's just a different way of looking at it. And same thing goes for their actual weight. A lot of dogs in here are super overweight.
Yeah. I know. I see some of them all the time at this coffee shop I go to. So, I was just thinking about, backpacking. I've done a lot of backpacking over the years and all that. And especially when you start at the beginning, because you're carrying more weight generally because you have more food or whatever, and how long it takes your body to get adjusted to carrying that extra weight. So that makes all the sense. I never really thought about somebody riding a horse, but that makes sense to me.
I mean, it's crazy how, we can take that same example though, throw it back into dogs. Your big old fat, lab getting on and off the couch all the time, having to walk around, like, how much extra weight is it carrying?
Right.
Or force is it putting through every one of its joints as it moves? Which is, and we adjust. So like we work on animals, we adjust the spine, get it moving. And we always suggest that, the owner is looking at some sort of weight loss program for their dog, look at what they're feeding. What's funny is I had a lot of patients, for some reason, they thought that when they look at the bag of food, they go, hey, my dog is 40 pounds and it should be 20, but it says 40 on here, so I need to be feeding it 4 cups, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they were like, not what you want your dog to be weighing at, so. But we've had a lot of those conversations, and then we also incorporate a lot of swimming.
Low impact exercise.
Oh yeah, it's low impact exercise, but it's also because they're not weight bearing.
Right.
The amount of motion they can get in their spine is actually really, really high.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I facilitate the motion. Joints are not moving properly. I facilitate the motion, and then that will actually help. As they move through the water and whatnot, it actually refacilitates more motion. It's like you have two links in a chain or in a bike chain that aren't moving, and you kind of break them loose, and they're moving a little bit, and then you start moving the chain. Well, now all of a sudden they want to move, and then you get that motion back.
That's a good visual. I can totally see that. That's a good visual.
And with what I do, I have to have analogies out the wazoo. So
Yeah.
it helps create that mental picture, especially on a podcast. I'm hoping that makes sense to people.
Well, it totally does. That's the whole point. Like when I was talking earlier about the spine and the electrical were going down. Let's do this. I know. So for you guys listening, we're going to get into exotic pets here in a bit because he goes all over the place. He's one of these cerebral guys. But I'm going to hold the dessert till the end. Can you talk about help people visualize adjusting a horse, and let's work our way down from horse to canine to feline a little bit, just to see so people can see it because I've seen it happen, so I know what it looks like, but I'm sure you can explain it better. I know you can explain it better than me, but and also try to give a visual picture for it.
Yeah. So whenever we were in school, we were taught how to work on two different kinds of animals. We were taught how to work on horses, and we were taught how to work on dogs. And then from there, we can branch out to every other spine to an extent. So, like with a horse, what I do is kind of have a pattern that I run through where I'm standing at the front of the horse, and I'm trying to. I'm also working with an animal. I'm not working with the car. The car doesn't have feelings, but an animal does. So
Right.
I work at their front end, and I'm sitting there and I'll talk to the horse, just so that they can see who I am. Like I take my glasses off, my sunglasses, and I look them eye to eye, and I'm like, all right, bud, I'm gonna work on you, and I start by working on the jaw. So I'll take the jaw and I'll move it from side to side, and I'll see where that joint motion is,
Mm-hmm.
and then if there's not very good joint motion from side to side, I apply a little thrust, which will kind of open up the jaw, and all of a sudden that horse is like, whoa, what did you just do to me?
Will they hear that sound? Because anybody's been adjusting here, like when they do your neck,
Oh yeah,
and you hear that sound, it's kind of freaky.
yeah, especially in a horse or in a jaw, right? So
Yeah.
there are so many there's so much there are so many nerve endings that actually innervate into the jaw, that whenever we make a jaw adjustment, we're also freeing up some of their neck, but we are eliciting a massive neurological response into the brain. And immediately, if they have let's say they have a thing that needs to be adjusted, or if they have their jaw needing to be adjusted, immediately after I adjust it, there is this look and sense of relief. They have a massive serotonin kick, dopamine's rising, and all of a sudden their eyes start to droop, like their eyes get heavy. They start licking and chewing, which in horses is a sign that it's not always a sign that they're happy, but a lot of the times it's a sign of like, that feel good, I'm happy.
Well, wait, hold on for 1 second. So, what would cause a jaw to be out of line or whatever? Because from eating, or is it what is it?
Yeah, so their jaw, because they chew back and forth,
Uh huh.
not necessarily chewing a cud like a cow, but they're chewing back and forth. The joints may get to a point where they don't go through their full range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, man, I'm trying to think of a really good example, but basically the joint is supposed to go, let's say it's supposed to go 3 inches to the right, 3 inches to the left.
Okay.
And then over time, though, let's say that maybe they have something in their mouth that causes a little bit of pain, so they decide not to chew off of one side for a period of time. Well, maybe they lose that range of motion to where they can't go a full 3 inches on the right anymore. Maybe they go 2.5. Maybe they go 2.
Right.
Maybe they get their teeth floated. They get their teeth floated because they're and I don't know how deep into this I'm going, but they get their teeth floated because they end up with spurs on their teeth. Well, those spurs can poke into the mouth, and it's like, well, I'm not going to chew on this side because it's painful.
Oh, they start chewing the wrong way. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. But whenever they go in to get that corrected, let's say they get their teeth floated, the dentist has to keep the jaw open for a period of time. Well, if you've ever been at the dentist and had your mouth open for a long time, you're like, okay, I need a break. This hurts.
Right.
Right. So you can have that same thing happen for these guys. And instead of chewing up and down like we do, they chew side to side. So it's going to affect them more. So, I mean, those are just two easy ones. I mean, there's the other ones, getting kicked.
Right.
Well,
I was just wondering if it had something like if the jaw's out of line, it had to do with the neck being screwed up or anything like that. It's just something that happened to the jaw, and then it's something else. So it's not related to generally the spine. It's more just something that happened to them in the jaw, like an injury or whatever.
Yes and no. So we can actually have tension because of tension maybe on the back of the skull.
Uh-huh.
The relation between the back of the skull and the jaw, like it's a very, very, very close. on people and on animals. And so we can see that if you have a lot of tension on the back of your skull, you're going to have jaw tension as well. And so it can be because of upper neck issues as well.
Okay. So let's move to the neck and just, I've seen the backs and stuff of horses being adjusted. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So we use, I'll adjust in, I'll go in, I'll work on their feet, their legs, their shoulders, and the correlation between like their neck and their shoulder, no different than the neck and the jaw, the upper neck and the jaw. The lower neck and the shoulders are so closely related. They play on each other. So if you have a shoulder problem, you're going to have a neck problem. And if you have a neck problem, you're probably going to have a shoulder problem because it's tension, right? Tension in the area. But then we jump into their spine where I have to use an adjusting bale, which is like a big styrofoam block. Think of like a big styrofoam block covered in vinyl. So like a giant block of cheese, like in its wrapper.
Okay, sure.
But like it stands probably, it's probably 3 foot tall, maybe 2 foot wide, and or maybe 3 foot wide and then 2 foot deep or something. It's just a big block.
So you're pushing them against that thing, I guess, is what I'm visualizing. Is that
Well, what I do is I put that block kind of up next to them.
Uh-huh.
And then what I do is I stand on top of that block.
Oh, okay.
And then that gives me the leverage to be able to adjust their spine. Because their spines, depending on the size, I work on tiny ponies. I work on Clydesdales. Like a big, Budweiser Clydesdale.
Sure.
And so depending on the size, I have to be able to get the proper
Angle.
Angle, to be able to adjust, to be able to apply the force that I need to apply. Well, the horse is big, so I have to figure out how to change my force. So force equals mass times acceleration. So my mass isn't changing. I'm as big as I am, but I can change my acceleration. So I have to be quick. So I can find an area in their spine, put pressure on it, and then I very quickly make a thrust, which will then make the joint move. It sounds easier than it is, but
oh, I know.
it's very, very specific. So every joint has a different joint angle. So there are areas of the thoracic spine where I have to apply force at different angles because of the angle changes within the joints that actually are the interconnecting pieces of the joint or the interlocking pieces of the joint. They have different angles, and so I have to know every single one of them and where I'm supposed to thrust and how hard to push. And there's a lot there. And then I can jump into the pelvis where that's a whole nother animal. And then we jump down into like lower limb and tail.
You have to adjust the tail?
Yeah. So the tail hooks up. It's the coccyx, which is just an elongation of your sacrum.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. And that's balanced too, right?
So I can pull it from side to side because you have ligaments attached there that affect where the sacrum is sitting.
Oh, I never
Sacrum can be shifted over to one side. Yeah, there are ligaments that go from there down, ligaments and tendons that go down from there and loop in around the anus and all of that. So, you can have massive changes to body function just because the tail is in the wrong position. If anybody's ever broken their tailbone, they know how bad it hurts to sit.
Sure.
It's the same thing. We have to be really careful with that area, but we can do a lot there that provides a ton of relief.
That's crazy. I never thought about that. Does that affect dogs too?
It affects everything. So I will do that on dogs and horses. If you think about it, the spinal cord actually anchors into the coccyx or the tailbone.
Sure.
So the filum terminal of the spinal cord will go down and actually attach there. So if it is shifted over, it's kind of like being in a boat, but all of a sudden your anchor moves on you. The whole boat's going to move. Well, that's because of the tension on that anchor. Well, your anchor point,
right.
If that anchor point moves or shifts over to one side, the entire spine will compensate to relieve that pressure.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we can have animals that have a crooked spine and we adjust the tail and all of a sudden their spine levels out on its own.
That's crazy. I never ever thought about, maybe that's wrong with me. Maybe I should grow a tail.
Yeah.
Anyways, so then you go to the dogs. Basically, it's just a smaller version of what you're doing with the horses. There's something different physically that you do with a dog versus a horse that's just different. I'm guessing because of all the education you have to go through, everything's touch and feel for you for the most part, aside from having x-rays.
Yeah. Everything it's based on, it's based on visual examination, but also palpation, like what I'm actually feeling.
Mm-hmm. And you can feel heat too and stuff like that too, right?
Oh yeah. So as I'm running my hand down the spine, I can feel. I look for multiple things. So I'm feeling for actual alignment issues. So I'll feel, every bone's connected to muscle. And so I can feel that the muscle may be more tonic on one side than the other.
Mhm.
There's also the changes in blood pressure, or not just blood pressure, but vasculature that happens whenever a bone is not moving properly. It changes which will again change the vascularity, which will cause it to be hot or actually really cold.
Right, because there's no circulation.
Yeah, exactly. And we've actually shown that on. I had a doctor come in and shoot infrared.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, or I say infrared, it was thermal, but thermal imaging, pre and post adjustment. So we were taking horses. You could clearly see these hot spots in their spine. And what she did is she did not tell me where the hot spots were.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I would find the area and I'd go, okay, this I can feel that this area is not moving properly, where I'm putting up force into it and it's not wanting to move. Or I can go, okay, I can feel the tonicity change. I can feel the heat all over this area, or this area is very, very, it's colder than the surrounding tissue. And then I make the adjustment, and then her thermal images later actually showed a change in those areas.
Oh, that's so cool.
It is really cool. And we did that. She was with me for like 3 days. We did it on dogs and horses, and and it will be published in a study. But it's phenomenal, showing the immediate difference in vasculature change in the areas where like my hand was, right? So again, we were looking at areas that were cold that became hot and hot that became cold. So, and we waited a period of time to make sure that there was no residual body heat from me that was still there. But it was just really, really cool.
What I like about that, I know you got a gazillion things in there, but I wanted to address something because, there's some controversial between chiropractic and we've talked a little bit about it, and I'm well aware of it, both on humans and animals. And what I thought was interesting when I was looking at the history of animal chiropractic, it really started when Palmer, or whatever the guy's name was first doing this stuff, and he was using animals to prove that it was actually not a placebo effect, that they're actually worked on them. But by doing that study with the heat and be able to show that, it kind of verifies that you're doing something different.
Oh, for sure. That is just one study.
Right.
And if you look at, I think we can get really, really deep into that really quick. Where there's a standard for studies, and nowadays it seems that if you don't have a study, it doesn't exist.
Right.
So in talking to veterinary neurologists, or they always say, "Show me the studies," and I go, "Well, it'd be really, really great if we could have studies, but veterinarians have not wanted to work with chiropractors for the last 100 years, so we don't have very many studies." But yeah, it was actually BJ Palmer was like, you know what? People have placebo, and they are coming in here and they leave thinking they're feeling better. So it could be, not that it could be placebo, but to show that it wasn't placebo, let's go ahead and do it on animals. And you see differences in animals. They couldn't do this before, now they can. And it was showed 100% that there was no placebo. And I mean, he believed in it so much that he rode an elephant. He adjusted this elephant and rode it through the center of town to prove a point. And I haven't done that yet. But what's crazy is the neurology. The neurology that we know for chiropractic is directly in line with that of the medical profession or the medical world. And the neurology shows that, like there are certain areas of the spine that do XYZ whenever this and this and this happen. Well, in my studies, I actually found that like a nerve that chiropractors have known about for 100 years, the recurrent meningeal nerve, was just discovered in the veterinary world 2 years ago.
Oh, I know. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And what it's showing is that there's just kind of a misunderstanding. So between the medical world and chiropractors, or veterinary world and chiropractors, that and again, this isn't like everybody's this way, because we have phenomenal relationships with medical doctors, veterinarians, neurologists, veterinary neurologists, and all that. But we do have people who don't know much about what we do, and because of the maybe lack of understanding, they immediately see it as a woo-woo crazy thing. But the neurology, even though we don't have a whole lot of studies yet to show, the basic neurology 100% proves what we're talking about. It's just getting I think getting in front of them and being able to have those conversations is super, super important. But anyway, that's a whole other topic.
There's in vet school now, though, they're starting to teach both chiro and acupuncture in school finally. Some schools are, at least.
They are, yeah. And that was recent.
Well, I think we talked about this, because I had the stem cell thing, and one of the frustrating things for me is they're always asking for studies, which is the same exact thing you're going through, even though you've got the evidence from just looking at the animals and getting test results and all that kind of thing,
Hmm.
is that generally, if you weren't taught it in school, you're going to be more apt to not want to do it versus somebody who's been practicing for a long time. And it was the complete opposite when I was getting involved in the vet world. I thought it would have been the complete opposite. Younger guys would be going, "Oh yeah, let's try this." Younger guys, I wasn't taught in school, not doing it. So hopefully, with studies like that, they'll start teaching people in school, and then people will be more open to it. I mean, I know it works.
Oh yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah. There, what's it is really crazy. And I was talking to some veterinary students, and some of them are really really open to things that they're like, I just think there might be more out there. And then some people are really really strict on this is the way it is, and this is only the way it is,
Traditional, yeah.
and you have to have a study to show it and all that. But like I think some people just don't think outside the box. And I think that there are some things that kind of lead people to not wanting to believe that.
Sure.
What's crazy, yeah, everybody kind of wants a study, but like in chiropractic, what's interesting is that everybody wants to base it around pain. And pain's a really really bad indicator. One, two, it's really really hard to determine pain in animals. They can't say, oh, it's a 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 or 10 out of 10.
Right.
So you have to base it off of function, or use a Glasgow index score, which is basically a modified pain scale. And what's crazy is that everybody wants to base it off of pain. So the only articles that we have over chiropractic are based around pain, but nobody really wants to dive deep into the neurology and say what's happening.
What's the science behind it?
Oh yeah, I can show you 200 articles, scientific articles showing the different aspects of chiropractic, on humans. And then as soon as we talk about it with animals, people go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, there are no studies on animals, therefore it doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Yeah, we can take a study on a rat and transpose it onto a human, and it's okay. We can take a study over gabapentin on people and turn around and use it on animals, and it's okay. But then, as soon as you want to talk about something like chiropractic,
Right.
there's a bias around it. Thank you, AMA. An old lawsuit that from propaganda back in the day of saying chiropractors will kill you and
Sure.
maim your family and all that, and that stuff is perpetuated for years. But I think that the science and the tides are turning, and that people are more open to listening and learning, and hopefully it changes the perception for animals, because I mean this is the whole point. It's not about the professions, it's really about helping as many people or animals as we possibly can. So I'm really hoping people start looking at it through that lens.
Well, the other side too is of which people don't always. You can extrapolate, right? So if you help the animal, you're helping the pet owner. Because they're stressed out too and going through whatever else they're doing. Let me ask you a question. I was thinking about we were talking. Do you treat a lot of animals with arthritis? And that's probably the biggest thing that's treated by vets these days, just because it happens to any older animal. What do they do in chiropractic for like a dog that's got OA or something like that?
Fantastic question. So what's interesting is changing the, not the conversation, but changing the perception. So everybody says or arthritis happens because of old age. Well, I can take a person's spine and we go, okay, arthritis happens because of old age. Well, I only see one vertebra that's becoming arthritic. They're all the same age, though.
Right.
All the vertebrae are the same age. All the joints are the same age. So why is it only a few become arthritic and others don't? And we start looking, like especially in the animals, we go, wow, they really become arthritic right here at the thoracolumbar junction, just because of old age. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Every dog that comes through has the same spot that has arthritis, and we want to say it's old age. So we do work on an animal with arthritis, but no different than the conversation we had earlier about. I think we had it. I know I've had it plenty of times today with patients, but like we're looking at like an old vehicle. If we don't take care of something, then it breaks down.
Right. We don't change the oil, it's going to run bad. I got it.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't move properly. So if we take joints that don't move properly or move in a way they're not supposed to, over time they become arthritic.
Right.
So we work on those areas that are arthritic. I mean, most of the dogs that come in have arthritis to some degree, and it's the dog that jumped off the bed every single day of its life that has the shoulder arthritis. It's the dog that had the pelvis that wasn't moving well for most of its life that has the pelvic arthritis, or the pelvis wasn't moving, and so the pelvis didn't move the way it was supposed to. So the lumbar spine or the thoracolumbar junction had to compensate. Now that area becomes arthritic. It's those repetitive nature problems, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
where we have the problem becomes arthritic.
What's wearing out and doing whatever. So, but So that would be maintenance if you catch it early and do that. But once they're there, are you adjusting? What are you doing for, like hips and elbows and all that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah, so basically what we do is we take the joint. The joint's not moving through its normal range of motion. All joints get nutrition through movement. It's called imbibition. Basically, the joint has to move, and because of movement, we have an exchange of fluid. That fluid has nutrition in it, and in discs specifically, it's basically a sponge. And so, as the disc compresses and then decompresses, it pulls in nutrition. So if the joint's not moving properly and becomes arthritic, my first objective is to try to get it moving again so that it can start absorbing nutrition again. So we find those areas that are arthritic. We work through those areas. So we apply a force. Again, think of you have a bike chain and you have two links that are starting to rust. Well, now the whole chain can still move. If you put it on a bike, it still moves. But those two links are kind of fused together. They don't move very well.
Right.
So what we do is we break them loose.
And you get some WD-40.
Yeah, exactly. WD-40 on a bike chain. But you could also take that bike chain and hit it with a hammer and break those two pieces loose. Now, we're not doing that with your dog or with a human or whatever. But what we're doing is we're facilitating motion back in that joint to get it to move again. And now, as you move the body like you would that bike chain on a bike, you're starting to facilitate motion back in it. Now it wants to move. Now it can start pulling in nutrition. And it's the same thing with like an elbow joint or a shoulder. Now there does reach a point where the damage that's done is done, and I can't do anything.
Right.
I'm not trying to reverse arthritis. I'm trying to catch it where it's at and go, okay,
Sure.
prevent it from getting worse. Your car will always be the way it is, but you have to put a quart of oil in it, and it will be fine. I promise. That's kind of the same thing. We find those areas that are arthritic, we put motion into them, and then we go, okay, stop it where it's at, and we
Minimize what it is. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes it's quality of life. Like sometimes we have animals that come in and it's a quality of life issue because the joints that don't move are also contributing to the overall pain of the animal. Arthritic pain is not pain because of the arthritis. It's not pain because of the bone. It's actually pain because the joint's not moving properly, which actually causes an increase in glutamate in the spine. I'm about to go neurological on you. It causes the glutamate to increase in the spine. Well, that increase in glutamate causes a lower threshold for pain. And pain is really just a switch. It's not really it's not like there is a threshold for it, but it's a switch. And how fast or how low can you get that threshold on that switch? Maybe first thing I thought of is like if you watch like Quigley Down Under. I'm gonna go into another movie. The movie he's got a gun.
Angelic. I know it is.
He's got a gun that like he's got two triggers on the gun. One's a trigger that sets the other trigger, and the other one becomes a hair trigger. And then that hair trigger doesn't take hardly anything for it to fire. Well, if you didn't set the first trigger, it's harder to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
The body's the same way where you build up and build up and build up and build up and lower the threshold for pain. So now all of a sudden the body's in pain all the time, and we call that arthritic pain or chronic pain. So what we try to do is we try to facilitate motion, which stops that pain cycle, or at least raises that threshold again to where the body isn't perceiving pain all the time. And so whenever we have those dogs that are arthritic, my first goal is to put motion into it to facilitate motion, increase nutrition, stop the degenerative process, but it's also to stop that pain cycle.
Right.
It's really cool.
And part of that's inflammation as well.
100%. So anytime a joint becomes arthritic, it actually has inflammation in it, and
Right.
and that's it's cytokines. But basically, I mean, there are studies for it. I can show you studies for everything I've said today. But whenever a joint is arthritic, there are cytokines and inflammatory markers within the joint. So it is 100% inflammation within the joints, 100% inflammation also within the surrounding tissues. I can also show you studies that show that within 3 weeks of a joint not moving, it starts to create adhesions. Within, I think it's 6 weeks of that joint not moving, the body perceives that that joint is staying where it is forever, as in like that's where it's going to be. So the body starts preventing that area from moving like it's supposed to. It's really cool and really crazy.
Now, I want to get into the exotic thing so we don't run way too late.
Yeah.
How did you get into exotic animals? And let's get some of the stories. I know there was that big one that just came out recently. I'm kind of using that as my big dessert. But
Oh, for sure.
how did you get into that? And then you know which one I'm talking about. Let's talk about some of the other ones. I know you've done chickens and stuff like that, but let's talk about some of the how you got into it and then some of the ones you've treated.
So I had already worked. I had gotten out of school. I'd worked on horses and dogs and all of these other animals. Well, I was in Petco one day, and this lady had a lizard, and it was one of those deals where I could see the lizard. I mean, its spine was crooked, and we were kind of talking about it. I said, I'm a chiropractor, and she goes, and I said, I work on animals, and she goes, well, can you work on my lizard? It's like, yeah, sure, and so I'm checking its spine, and I'm making an adjustment, and that lizard turned and looked at me and just laid down like, oh my gosh, that was amazing.
Thank you.
And so and its spine straightened out, and it was a very simple adjustment, and it was like it was really, really cool. Well, immediately I was like, oh my gosh, that's my first exotic, adjustment was on this lizard. I was like, I am an exotic animal chiropractor. And so I called up to the zoo. This is a real quick story. So I remember listening to this guy. He was a author, and he wanted to become like a world famous author and whatnot. So he created a book. Nobody wanted to buy it, and so what he did is he bought all of his own copies from the publisher. Didn't tell the publisher, and then it was like, oh my gosh, we ran out of books, and so the publisher printed a new set of books. And then he would call up to the local bookstores and say, hey, I'm looking for this book. Do you have it? And they said no. And he would call in different accents and say, I'm looking for this book. Do you have it? And they said no.
I like that guy.
Yeah, he'd call up and he'd go, hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm coming into town. And they're like, oh my gosh, everyone is asking for your book. He's like, oh my gosh, I actually have some copies on me. And so he would do signings, and he became a very, very famous author. And the whole point of his story was create your own success.
Right.
And it was a really cool story and whatnot. So I called up to the zoo and was like, hey, I'm the exotic animal chiropractor in Oklahoma, and I need to speak to the head vet about animal chiropractic for your zoo. And they're like, all right, cool. Come on in.
That's great.
I was like, wait, what? Yeah. So I started talking to the vet, and she hands me a set of x-rays, and she goes, here, if you don't mind looking at these. And I look at them, I'm like, why do you have human x-rays? She's like, these are for the gorilla that we want you to work on.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And through a series of events, that specific adjustment didn't happen. But I ended up working on bears and chimpanzees and lions and whatnot for the zoo. And then that led me into working on other people like around here, working on exotics of private owners. I worked on a bear cat and worked on kangaroos and, all sorts of stuff. And that led me to Africa.
Well, that's what I want to ask you because in your description on your thing, you talk about worked with the zoo, you'd worked with. I actually wrote it down. I was going to ask you about this. So you worked at animal sanctuaries and safaris. So
Yep.
I because some people safari just means going on a trip, but
Right.
So you were in Africa on safaris working on animals.
Yeah. So what's crazy is like at the zoo, right? You have this animal is sedated. We have all these safety protocols.
Sure.
Animal has to be sedated for X number of time before it's intubated. We were out in the middle of nowhere in Africa, and we were transporting animals and having to move them or checking on them, doing health exams and whatnot. And they were like, that lion, we want that, or that gazelle or whatever. And they were darting them out of helicopters, and we run over and grab them and pick them up. And I check their spine before we, transport them. There was a lion. They were like, all right, we need to do surgery on that lion. And they darted this lion, and it was surrounded by all these other lions. So we had to once it was starting to go to sleep, we had to run, push in there with all these other lions and build a barricade and then pull this lion out of the sanctuary. I say sanctuary. It was a 15-mile plot of land.
What country were you in? Were you in Kenya or Tanzania?
No, I was in South Africa.
Oh, South Africa. Sure.
Yeah. So it was very very segmented. So when we were on safari, it was huge areas of land that could fit an entire city in them.
Sure.
And that'd be like one person's property with all these lions and bears, or not bears, lions and rhinos and giraffes and elephants and all sorts of stuff. One guy had a whole herd of elephants. It was crazy. But yeah, so we're working in the bush, working on these animals. And then that led me to, I worked on some crazy stuff there. I worked on a lion. I worked on gazelle and zebras. And I worked on Cape buffalo.
Oh, that's cool.
Deadly animal. Yeah, crazy. Whenever I was here in the States, I also worked on one more animal, but that might give something away for the later animal. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in the States, I also worked at a rattlesnake museum. This guy it was all of these crazy exotic snakes, including ones that will kill you in 3 steps. And he said, hey, I have a boa that I'd like you to work on. Worked on it. And then he goes, hey, I've got one more for you. I said, okay, and I'm sitting out, and he brings out this, and you just hear the rattle, and he brings out a
Oh,
rattlesnake.
not me. Not happening with me.
Yeah, so all of a sudden my stomach drops, my heart's in my chest or in my throat, and he brings this rattlesnake out, and he's like, "Hey, we noticed it was an issue. Blah blah blah. Can you check it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." So he's holding its head down, and I'm holding the end with a rattle, and I've got a rattle in one hand, and it's ticked and rattling like crazy.
Man.
I find a spot in his spine where he was saying there was a problem, and I found the spot, and I made the adjustment, and the rattle stops rattling,
Oh, that's crazy.
and it just lays its tail down and starts like moving its tail around, but it's not rattling anymore. And it was just like this really cool, like,
He was just setting you up to bite you. I'm telling you now.
yeah, yeah, it was a really cool connection. And then, it was neat though. But I was like, man, one wrong move.
Yeah. I don't know the snake thing. I'm not for me. By the way, so the word in Swahili, I love this word for zebra because if you go to like, I've spent a lot of time in Africa, all over the place doing some volunteer work, but you go to Tanzania or Kenya, you see zebra everywhere. They're just all over the place. So the word for zebra in Swahili is punda malaya, and what it translates to is donkey with stripes.
Yeah.
They just look at them as it's kind of like our deer here in Texas or in Oklahoma. Oh yeah, they're deer. When nobody else has seen them, they're going crazy. But there's another donkey with stripes.
Oh yeah.
Pretty funny. I love that story.
They act so working on horses is one thing. Most of the horses I work on are okay. Working on donkeys is a pain. I like working on them, but man, they are temperamental.
Yeah.
And the zebras I've worked on some here in the States that were not sedated. And I've worked on them in Africa when they're sedated. And I much prefer a sedated zebra. Man, they are mean.
Are they mean, really? Well, have you seen that cross between a zebra and a horse, a zebra or whatever they're called?
No, I've not seen that.
Yeah, they're like mules. They're sterile, but there are some out there that are literally a cross of a horse and a zebra.
I have not seen that.
Yeah, I think it's called Zobra. I actually was trying to find out if there was like a rescue for it, but they're sterile, so there's not many of them, but they've been around. Okay, so let's get into the story that just went viral for you guys because it's just so cute. Is the reason why it is, and of course, I told you some of the reasons why I like that. But let's get into the story. You know which one I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to. I'll let you do the whole thing.
Oh yeah. So I ended up getting a call. Well, back up a little bit. So I got a call to go work on, or at least talk to these people in Texas about working on some of their animals. So I go down to Texas and we start talking about it, and we're like, okay, how can we make this happen? And I'm kind of like doing a lead up, but they're like, how can we make this happen? And so I was like, hey, if we do, we're going to need safety protocols here, here, and here. This is how we would do this. This is how we do this. The owner was like, you know what? I think you need to come with us to one of our conferences and talk to everybody about chiropractic for these animals. And I was like, all right, cool. So I go, and everyone's like, I have never heard of this, but we're down to try it. Well, I had a lady get a hold of me here in Oklahoma, and she was like, hey, can you come work on my giraffe? And I was like, yes, I can. So I went down to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I met with her, and we worked through a lot of stuff talking about the benefits of chiropractic. We talked about what I'm going to be doing. I'm working with an animal that is a very large animal, but it has multiple points of concern when it comes to like safety. So
Sure.
if you're around their feet, they can kick you. And in Africa, I worked on a giraffe, and I watched it kick a tree, and the bark popped off the tree.
Yeah, I know they're big. They're a lot bigger than you think they are.
Yeah, and their leg reach is insane. So,
Yeah.
and they're very, very, very quick. And so you can't get around their legs. There's safety concerns there. When you're around their head, they use the ossicones on the top of their head for fighting.
Right.
So they whack each other with them. And if you take a hammer at arm's length and swing it around and whack something, it's going to break whatever it's hitting. Well, so I have to worry about the ossicones, and I have to worry about how big they are. They can just, I mean, their skulls are really heavy as well, but they have so many potentials to hurt you. And so the whole thing was talking to the owner, making sure she understood what was going on, but I'm also about to work on her baby. And so I had to make sure that he was super, super, super comfortable with everything I was doing. We had to, I had to work into, going from just petting him.
Was he sedated at all? Because we're going to tell everybody where the videos, but was it sedated at all?
No, wasn't sedated at all.
That's even more blows my mind.
Yeah. So this guy was not sedated, and he had been kind of, I would say, like, trained, but he is accustomed to people, and so he's okay with people being around him or touching him. And so we, which makes it easier because of a wild giraffe. It's not,
Sure.
that's probably not going to happen in that way. So, which is kind of the difference between the zoo world and private ownership. And so what we were doing was I would move my hands around in a way where I'm like doing everything very slowly. I would start to just put pressure on the areas. I go, okay, where is this problem? Where's that problem? Put a little bit of pressure and see how he'd respond. And I put a little more pressure and see how he'd respond. And I'm constantly in contact with the owner going, okay, what's he thinking? Not necessarily what's he's thinking, but they know the signs and symptoms.
Sure. Is he looking happy or mad?
Exactly. Right. And so, I start working on this giraffe, and he's loving it. He's loving the attention. He's loving me putting my hands on him. And I make the adjustment, and he looks at me like, what was that? That was awesome. And he's all about it. And so I started out just like I was saying with the horse. I work into the jaw, and then I work over into the neck, and I work into those main problem areas, but I want to initiate that I'm here to help you. And so we were doing that, and he was eating it up, just super happy about it. And we ended up, my wife was there, and she was catching it all on film, and we were like, oh, cool, cool experience or whatever. And then we, my social media team, cropped the video up and posted it, and it went crazy, and it went viral. And
I know. Well, and there's a reason why. So for you guys that are listening, and I'll have a reel out when this comes out as well about this, but that giraffe, and let's go a little bit back because what they noticed it wasn't chewing properly or something, right? Is that how they told you?
yeah.
And then when you do that adjustment, and there's a period of time, but he just comes over and like lays his head on your shoulder, like, "Oh, thanks for fixing me." It's so cute.
Yeah, it's amazing how, again, the unbiased nature, right? We do something and they go, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." Not, it feels a little bit better, but I'm still in pain. They're just like, "I was in pain before, and you helped me to some degree. Thank you so much."
It's amazing.
It's the coolest experience. And I remember doing an interview about it, and they were like, "What was it like?" And I was like, "I don't, scratchy," like it, all of his hair, and he was licking me, and
Yeah.
it was really cool. But that, like, show of gratitude.
Oh, and it's so visual when you see it, and I'll have it in a reel too. But
Yeah.
when you guys see this thing, it's just the cutest thing ever. So, if people want to find out about you, can you give everybody your website address and social media and all that stuff too, so they can figure out all that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So my website is oklahomachiro.com. So it's Oklahoma and then Chiro, CHIRO.com. And then our social media, most of it, I believe, is under Dr. Joren Whitley. So it'd be Dr. and then I think there's a dot in there, maybe Dr. dot. And then it's Joren, JOREN _ Whitley, WHITLEY.
Cool. Well, it's great. Okay, so one last thing. I told you I was going to do a joke. Here's my joke of the day, and it's I got you a giraffe one just because I knew we were going to talk about the giraffe. So
Awesome.
here's my joke to you. Okay, you ready?
All right.
Why are giraffes always really slow to apologize?
Oh, I don't know.
Because it takes them a long time to swallow their pride.
Oh,
Yeah, that's how bad they are. Anyways, first of all, thanks so much, Jordan, for being on. I really appreciate it. This story is great. I could have talked for 2 or 3 hours, and you and I will go down all kinds of wormholes because I've got more questions than I had when I started now. But
oh yeah.
I really appreciate it. And then for everybody else listening, one is, as I always mention, obviously I need better jokes. So if you want your kids to tell a joke, or you want to tell a joke, or family, whatever, send me an email at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. Or you've got a great idea for an episode for a podcast. I promise you I'll get back to everybody. I do it all the time, and I really appreciate it. But anyways, more importantly, keep following, pass the story out. This is a great story. Get more people to follow us, keep listening. But most importantly for me, from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for real.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.